As I worked, the site manager berated us. My colleague threatened to leave. A carpenter hid the douchebag's car on site, revealing it 8 months later. I apologize for my poor English as I am Dutch, and this is a lengthy recounting of the consequences of really irritating a prankster. Some of the finer details may have been forgotten over time, as this story is around 30 years old, but I will narrate it to the best of my recollection without altering the essence of the tale. I worked as a new pipefitter on a job involving the construction of a large office building with approximately 25 floors, situated in the heart of the city. I was fortunate to be on site during both instances when this story transpired. My colleague and I were assigned to install a 6-inch gas pipe for the building's heating system. This was a 2-phase operation where we first needed to route the gas pipe into the building during the rough construction phase, installing a valve with a blind for safety. We would then return months later, just prior to the heating system being activated, to complete the final section and install the gas meter itself. Day 1 upon arriving on site, as one could expect, parking was a nightmare given that the construction was in the center of Rotterdam, Netherlands. My 2 ground workers and I were dropped off, while my colleague parked the van a 5-minute walk away. We were instructed to report to the site manager, so we waited for my colleague, who was leading the job and had significantly more experience than I did. As I was still learning the finer details of the trade under his guidance, I was eager for his arrival. He was a friendly, patient individual who trained all the new workers. Once he joined us, we approached the site manager to hear his directives and the rules we needed to follow. We entered the manager's office, and my colleague knocked on the door. The manager was on the phone and instructed us to grab a coffee, assuring us he would join us shortly. 15 minutes passed, and my colleague began to think he had completely forgotten about us, which was not unusual since site managers often lead busy lives. He went to check on the manager again, only to be told to wait a bit longer. This sequence repeated 3 more times, and by the 4th time, we had been waiting for over an hour. At that point, my colleague had enough, marched into the manager's office, and resolved to stay there because we couldn't afford to waste the entire day. Then the site manager erupted, shouting, "Can't you see I am on the phone? Wait outside until I have time for you." My colleague replied, "All right. So you don't want gas for your shiny new building. Fair enough, we are leaving now, and I'll inform the gas company that we are walking away from this site. Good luck securing gas anytime soon, as I refuse to be yelled at without reason after waiting for over an hour." He stepped out and informed us, "We are leaving." We began walking away, and outside, the site manager, who will henceforth be referred to as the jerk, caught up with us and started to humbly apologize, saying the job was a mess and so on. My colleague accepted his apologies, but made it clear that the next time we were here, he wanted to conduct the site introduction and discuss the job properly. A brief explanation for why the guy suddenly became so amicable towards my colleague: we were merely lowly contractor workers hired by the gas company. The gas company personnel are generally friendly and cooperative, always willing to help. However, if they were to learn about the site manager's behavior, they would side with us and enforce the rules strictly. Moreover, he would have been liable for paying our day rate, as commercial clients are charged for installation labor and materials, and they could certainly be unpleasant if they wished, knowing that we depended on them while they did not depend on us. At that point, it was break time, and in the canteen, we heard that the jerk had a terrible reputation for berating anyone beneath him, and that he always insisted on having his way or else. No one had anything good to say about him, except that he managed to finish his projects on time. After the break, we began our work. The team started digging the trench, while we drilled a large hole through the foundation to insert the gas pipe. As we worked, one of the ground workers approached my colleague to inform him that cars needed to be moved soon, as they were parked over the trench we were digging. My colleague asked one of the carpenters nearby whom to consult about the car relocation for the day, emphasizing that they could park there again the following day. The carpenter agreed to take care of it, eager to inform the jerk that he would have to relocate his car off-site, at least 5 to 10 minutes away during the busy city center workday. However, after a short while, the carpenter returned and asked if we were in a rush. I told him we still needed about 30 minutes, but we could manage after lunch, which was in 45 minutes, so that was fine with us. He agreed, and I can still see him grinning with mischief in his eyes. Since there were only 5 parking spots on site, it would be a hassle for all those who were permitted to park there to move their vehicles off-site in the middle of the day when the city center was busy. A few minutes later, he returned with a shovel and began digging 4 shallow, parallel trenches about 20 centimeters deep in soft sand where parking was prohibited. After 5 minutes, he finished and returned with a large, heavy-duty pallet nearly 20 feet long on a forklift, placing it down in such a way that the 4 beams underneath perfectly fit into the 4 holes he had dug. He then built a ramp using some wood in front of the pallet and walked away, effectively creating an inviting parking space. Following that, all the office staff began to move their cars, including the jerk. However, instead of driving his large vehicle away, he parked it on top of the pallet and returned inside, as it was break time. We followed suit, taking our lunch and warming up. Upon our return, we discovered a wooden cover over the pallet, which transformed it into a crate. We approached the carpenter, asking what he was up to. He responded, "Just wait and see, but don't discuss it." Approximately 15 minutes later, the tower crane came and lifted the crate to around the 20th floor, setting it down carefully. Then we saw the carpenter replace an identical pallet in the same spot. Later that day, we noticed they installed the mold to pour concrete over the crate for the next floor of the building. After witnessing this, we asked the carpenter if his disdain for the jerk had motivated his actions. He explained that he had previously confronted the jerk for being difficult, and in retaliation, the jerk had fired his son over a minor error made during a trial period. To make matters worse, he had also blacklisted him from the company for 10 years while training him to become a skilled master carpenter. Working alongside his son was something he had been looking forward to, but after 25 years at the company, he would have lost many benefits and job security had he chosen to leave. He also didn't want to grant the jerk the satisfaction of quitting. It was also revealed that the jerk was likely to park on the pallet, as walking was beneath him. We discussed him further and agreed the jerk was a first-class, unpleasant individual. Day 2 the following day, we were instructed to wait in the canteen after the first break. After break time, the jerk and the police entered and stood in front of us. He announced that his 2-month-old Mercedes-Benz 500 SEC, which he had waited 7 months for, had been stolen, and asked if anyone had seen anything. The entire room stifled laughter. Subsequently, we were questioned by the police, given our close proximity to the incident, but we insisted we hadn't noticed anything, as we were not paying attention. Once our work was completed for the day, we returned to our shop, laughing about the car on the way back, convinced that this marked the end of the story. Fast forward about 8 months, the exterior of the building had been completed, and we returned to finish the last bit of the gas pipe and install the gas meter itself. This time, it was just the 2 of us on the job. We approached the site manager, who was now exceptionally friendly from the start. We quickly discussed our plans, indicating that if all went smoothly, we could finish that day since everything was prefabricated in the shop. As we worked on positioning the pipe, we took our first break, walked into the canteen, and saw the carpenter sitting there. We joined him and casually mentioned, "We noticed the jerk regained possession of his car, as we had spotted a similarly colored Mercedes-Benz 500 SEC parked when we arrived at the site." He replied that it was not the same vehicle, but he urged us to refrain from discussing it publicly. He continued, stating that he had heard 3 weeks prior about our return, as he was aware the heating would be turned on that week to dry out the building, and he hoped it would be the same crew. After the break, he asked us to follow him, and we took the elevator to the 20th floor. He unlocked a large office room designed to accommodate about 15 to 20 people. In this space stood the Mercedes-Benz 500 SEC, gleaming and polished, resting on a finished floor, surrounded by nice-looking red carpeting and 4 large lamps, as if on display in a showroom. Amazed, we questioned him about how he had pulled this off. He recounted the entire saga from beginning to end, explaining that after our last visit, the crate had just sat there. He covered it with plastic, affixed labels, indicating that it could only be opened once the building had achieved dry in status standard practice for items difficult to access later. Later, he jacked up the crate and placed it on stands during the pouring of the final floor. After the floor hardened, he lowered the crate and filled in the holes. Having taken the previous Friday off, he had finally removed the crate. He managed to break into the car after learning how to do so without causing damage over the course of the previous 8 months. Once he rolled the vehicle off the pallet, he disassembled it, laid down the carpet, and rolled the car back onto it. Afterward, he polished and cleaned both the car and the room for the remainder of the day, even acquiring a spray can of new car scent and using it inside the vehicle. To top it off, he swapped out the parking fee for worthless foreign coins, all to annoy the jerk. He shared that the foreman for the floors was a longtime friend and also harbored a strong dislike for the jerk. He was the sole accomplice in this elaborate scheme, and no one else was aware of what he had done. He wanted to share this experience with us, being the only other outsiders who knew the full extent of the trickery. He then revealed that 2 weeks prior, the jerk had received his new Mercedes-Benz 500 SEC, which we saw parked outside, and had spent the interim annoyed at having to drive around in a small 200 series loaner he despised. He felt it was finally time to return the favor, having postponed his revenge just for us. At that point, he asked us to take a few pictures of him posing in the car, with a blow-up doll beside him and him leaning over the hood. He planned to keep these images for about 10 years, until his retirement when the statute of limitations on his actions would have expired, at which point he could present these to the jerk. He then placed the doll behind the steering wheel, locked the car, and we left the room with the door open, while he dragged 2 power cables with him and connected them to a power box, illuminating the room with the 4 1,000-watt halogen lights. He then suggested we head to the top floor, allowing for a little suspense to build. After about 10 minutes, we planned to return, expecting the jerk to arrive in the next 5 to 10 minutes. We took the elevator to the top floor, where we followed him up a few stairs to the door leading to the roof. Instead of leading us out, he went into the elevator's machine room, studied the control display for a while, and when he found all the lifts stationary, he turned off the power, locked it, and hung a sign saying, "Do not operate," before we went back down. Taking our time to return to the 20th floor, we could hear laughter building as we approached. When we reached the room where the car was parked, we discovered around 50 workers in the hallway and the room, all in fits of laughter. The car appeared as if it were in a brochure under the bright lights, except for the blow-up doll behind the steering wheel. Moments later, the jerk burst into the room, flushed and sweaty, as if he had just run up all 20 floors. He entered the room with eyes wide open, resembling a character from a cartoon. He stood there for about a minute, panting, dripping with sweat and cursing, until he finally noticed the 50 or so people laughing at him. I could see him turning red with fury as he began to shout, claiming anyone who did not vacate the premises within 10 seconds would be fired. We all chose to disperse, as the spectacle had concluded, but it had certainly been one unforgettable show. Later that day, the carpenter passed by again, and we shared a laugh about the events. We learned he had dismissed 2 individuals who had arrived later and laughed uncontrollably after witnessing the car with the doll still inside it, as it remained locked, while the jerk was still there. We shared some more stories and laughter, and my colleague requested the carpenter's phone number, wanting to follow up, as this was an experience too good to forget. We said our goodbyes. Due to the commotion and conversations, we ended up putting in an additional 30 minutes of unpaid overtime on a 5 to 6 hour job, but we didn't mind in the least. A few weeks later, my colleague contacted the carpenter to inquire about any consequences that followed. To our surprise, he learned that the 2 dismissed employees were back on the job the following day, as Human Resources overturned their termination, citing it would have been a costly wrongful dismissal. Additionally, the car had been dismantled by 2 mechanics from a junkyard over the course of 3 days, selling the parts as the vehicle could not be removed from the building any other way. Furthermore, several heads from the office, including the CEO, visited to witness the car on the 20th floor, further humiliating the jerk. The carpenter also mentioned that he had printed the photos, which turned out great, and he made copies of the images featuring him behind the wheel with the blow-up doll next to him. He affixed smiley stickers over the jerk's face in the pictures and distributed them throughout the building in peculiar locations, causing the jerk to become irate every time he stumbled upon one. Eventually, he began suspecting that the carpenter was the culprit behind this prank after about a week, as it was typical behavior for him. They had known each other for over 20 years and had a history, but without concrete evidence, the jerk was unable to take action. What I learned from being a front-row witness to this spectacle is that revenge is best served cold and that one should never provoke a prankster.